So I'd like to welcome our first speaker, who's Susannah from 38 Degrees, who's going to come and tell us a little bit about what she's doing. Give her a big hand. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Susie. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting us along. I'm very excited to hear about the other two people I'm speaking alongside. I'm going to spend about 3 minutes talking about 38 Degrees, and then we can talk about Activism later. So 38 Degrees, for those of you who haven't heard of it, is a campaigning organization in the UK. There's two things that make us different from other campaigning organizations, or somewhat different. The first thing is that we are entirely member-led. So our members decide what it is we do, and they tell us by email, they call us, and we also poll them every week and get data and analyze that data. The other thing is that we're entirely member-funded, so we don't take money from anybody other than our members. Our average donation is about £12, and that means that the only vested interest we have is in our members' opinion. We campaign on everything, really, from environment to education to NHS. We also campaign at local levels, so a couple of weeks ago, a member saved a large tree in Frome from being cut down, for example. So there's kind of every scale of campaign, from little local ones to big national ones, although I think we're best known for our national campaigns. And the three campaigns that we're running this week that kind of give you an illustration of the things that we do. The first is on the hospital closure clause, which is clause 119 of the Care Bill. And our members are contacting peers that they know in the House of Lords to get them to support an amendment to strike down clause 119. Second thing is a petition to HMRC to stop them selling off our tax data. So that's a slightly more traditional online campaigning tool. That's currently at about 160,000 signatures. And the third thing is Join the Vote, which is a massive voter registration drive, as we have 4,300 members roughly across the country who are this week walking around their neighbourhoods registering their neighbours to vote in the European elections. So that kind of gives you an idea of three of the kind of things that we do, although that doesn't really count in the local stuff. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the panel debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, next up we have Laurence from Sanbag.
Thank you. Oh, hang on. Come back. I've got my own slides.
I forgot about the slides.
Thanks, James.
Yeah, no, professional outfit here.
Sort me out.
All right. That one. No, there it is.
Yep, perfect.
I completely forgot about this part.
That's okay.
There we go.
Cool. Okay, so I'm a developer at Sanbag. We are a small NGO focused pretty tightly on reforming the European carbon market, which is called the Emissions Trading Scheme. We do that in a couple of different ways. Oh, why has that done that? What's next slide? Oh, thank you. I got it.
Did we start at the end?
Yeah, I started at the end. So, our online activism takes a couple of forms. We do a lot of lobbying with policymakers and other NGOs, but the online activism, public-facing we offer citizens the ability to take a ton of carbon out of the carbon trading scheme and destroy it. If they do that, they get a personalised certificate that we generate for them with an ID saying it's got a proper serial number. And we also email the European Commission to say that the person, a citizen, has spent their hard-earned money to actually take a ton out, and therefore that they should up their climate ambition and change the policies accordingly to make the market work as it should be. And that's quite a significant thing, we think. I mean, they cost about £5. Originally, a few years ago, they cost even more, and part of the problem is that the price has slumped so low in the market. So we feel that that's significant. Businesses also sometimes use us to buy offsets and credits, and we do the same thing. We also do maps and online visualizations. So the EU scheme covers every country in the European Union. There's a huge, it's about 60% of European industry is registered in the carbon markets, and so we display all of that information on an installation level. So you can search through online maps, see exactly who is emitting how much they're allocated and allowed to emit, and get quite a lot of fine levels of data. It's also connected to offsetting data that we've smooshed together, so you can see exactly where projects in Europe have bought in offsets from outside to use in their carbon compliance. And there's a lot to be said about that we don't touch on too much, but we do present that and make it available for everybody. I'll talk about a couple of different projects that we've tried to run in the past and some that we're doing now, one of which was a carbon Geiger app, a Geiger counter app for CO2. And one of the problems that we often find is it's a very big scheme and not particularly interesting, so trying to make it relevant to people is really key in our communications. So by saying to someone, here's your local source of pollution or CO2, here's its name, here's how much it's emitted, we thought that that would be a good way to get people to connect with their whole idea, so to give it a context. More recently, what with the European elections coming up, we had a go at, or I personally had a go at, doing a ratings tool for MEPs based on their voting records. And the idea was that we would do the climate change one, but we'd get other NGOs to curate a set of votes on different issues, and then we would be able to score them on each issue. So far we've got climate change, fracking, GMOs, and then we've got some more to come. And I haven't put the hyperlink up, but we should have done. That's on score-ep.org. And here's some more of the pictures. I don't know if you can see that too well, but you can get scorecards for each party, and you can see here we've picked UKIP on the left, and you can see that they're right down the scoring record for climate change votes, as you might expect. And maybe that's just my bias. But we thought that we could tell some interesting stories by looking at the data. What we found really was the stories aren't that exciting. The parties tend to cluster quite strongly into either being progressive on climate legislation or not. So this is really just a tool to kind of motivate people or give them the information that they need about the issues they care about. That was the idea. And that's about everything. So I look forward to the discussion.
Right. Next is Sanjay. You want to use your own machine, don't you? So yeah, we'll do a quick swap, which will be absolutely flawless and nothing will go wrong. There you go. Give it a go.
There you go. That's me.
I think we knew how to use technology or something.
Yeah, maybe. Hi guys, I'm Sanjay, so this is Course Hub. We are a tiny, tiny team of developers and designers, very, very new startup, and we care about making the world better. So what do you do when you want to make the world better? That's kind of what we ask ourselves all the time. And this is what our mind looks like when we ask ourselves that. It just goes blank. Because the problems in the world today are just so overwhelming and so complex, and we're overloaded with all of them every day through the news on the internet, that it just makes our mind go blank. And we've talked to loads of people who feel like that. This is my friend Marina. She's a student at UCL, and she gets her news, like many people do, through social media. She's got lots of friends who are really passionate activists, and they share things like petitions and other kind of calls to action. And they're telling her to, do this quick bit of action, and it will make a big difference. So she clicks through, and she sees that this petition will stop fracking. But Marina doesn't know what fracking is. So maybe she'll kind of have a read through and she finds out, oh, okay, fracking's a bad thing. But of course the petition's going to tell her that because it's a petition, right? It's inherently biased. So maybe she'll kind of Google it and she'll find out that it's a really, really complex issue. On Wikipedia, she'll just find out it's called hydraulic fracturing. So she'll leave the situation feeling overwhelmed and disempowered. We've also been working with a lot of charities recently, like Friends of the Earth. Hello. And they run campaigns on things like this. So they're currently running a campaign to stop fracking. So they'll get in a meeting room like this one, maybe about 5 of them, and they'll kind of decide what they need to do about this big injustice that's going on in the world. And then they'll map out this injustice into a thing that they call a theory of change. And it's kind of a standard now in charities. And it gives them a really, really good understanding of a big complex problem. Then they'll send out maybe a PDF to the rest of their organisation, and then they'll all understand this big complex problem, and then they'll send out a petition. So the problem is this big gap between campaigning organisations like Friends of the Earth and people like Marina. So that's why we're making Cause Hub. So imagine if instead of a petition that came up on Marina's newsfeed, it was a link to discuss something she cares about, like a healthier environment. She could click through to that, and on Cause Hub she'll see a healthier environment at the top, and at the bottom is the most tangible action she can take right now. So it might be a petition. It might be a petition to David Cameron, or it could be a letter to her local MP, or it could be just switching off the lights or not eating meat if it's something else. But then she can click on any step, and she can find out what people are saying about this action. She can vote herself whether she thinks that this thing will lead to the next thing. And then there's this democratic discussion where people can vote on people's comments. Then Marina can zoom out and can see the action in context with the rest of the issue. Just like the graph that charities are doing within their organisation, but this one wasn't just made by whoever can fit in a meeting room, it's made by an unlimited amount of people because it's the internet. So this could be supporters, could be partner organisations, scientists and think tanks, or most importantly, the people that charities are actually trying to help can actually have a say in their planning process. Once that community has come to a kind of decision, an agreement that step has been completed, it's marked with a tick, and then charities can then use this tool to work out how far they are in their aims. So we're co-designing this at the moment with Amnesty International and Friends of the Earth. We're kind of looking to keep working with other charities. So if any of you work in campaigning organisations, please do come and talk to me. And that's us, the Cause Hub. Thanks very much.
Thank you all for your introductions. The online activism thing is obviously a very important way of trying to influence policy and the world. What shall I start with? So I suppose it's one for Susie, which I guess you're very prepared for, so I won't feel too bad about asking it, but it may be slightly mean. 38 Degrees is certainly more in the collectivism side of things. And that's been described as the degradation of activism into a series of petition drives that capitalize on current events. Collectivism is to activism as McDonald's is to a slow-cooked meal, which is a quote I'm sure you know. It may look like food, but the life-giving nutrients are long gone. So it has its place, certainly. So I was wondering if you could tell us how you're trying to respond to that kind of thing, whether 38 Degrees are trying to sort of fix that model, or whether it's whether you see it as sort of a part of a spectrum of wider online activism. I suppose, how would you respond to that?
I think, so I see collectivism, depending how you want to talk about it, as kind of a gateway drug to the rest of activism. So without wishing to talk about drug policy, so when I got involved in activism, or particularly with 38 Degrees, I was a student studying social policy, and it was during the NHS changes, and I didn't really know too much about it, to be honest. And I saw a petition on 38 Degrees' website about the NHS changes, and I remember signing it, and then I got some more emails, and I wrote to my MP, and then I went to meet my MP, and then I went on a march. Eventually I moved to London and started working at 38 Degrees. That's quite a particular journey to me. I don't think everyone's going to start working at 38 Degrees. It's not the point. But I think that the word collectivism has quite negative connotations. And actually, I think that if those negative connotations come from quite a place of privilege, it kind of suggests that if you don't have the means to give up your day job and live in a squat and be a freegan and get kettled all the time, then you're not a real activist. And actually, I think that I would prefer to live in a world where the majority of people are engaged in politics and in policy in one way or another. And actually, not everybody has the time to spend 8 hours a day doing activism, or even the time to spend a day a month doing activism. And I would like activism to exist on every level, from the 1 hour every month to the full-time stuff. And I think that collectivism suggests that somehow people who engage once a month, or once a week, or once a day are less important and less valuable than people who engage all the time as their jobs. And actually, I think that's quite privileged and quite, just quite rude, actually. And I mean, like my family definitely call me a collectivist. That might be part of my personal response there. But yeah, no, I think that there's quite negative connotations attached to the word, and actually, if you strip away those connotations, I'm quite proud of collectivism, and I'm quite proud of where activism has got to and how it engages with the web. And I think that there's space within activism for all different kinds of activism, from our model to these models to loads of other models, NGO models, traditional lobbying models, insider models, outsider models, and actually all of it kind of moves toward the same end. And I think that we should stop trying to devalue each other quite as much and perhaps be proud of each other's strengths.
Do you guys want to say anything on the same sort of subject? It's a panel.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. I'm not sure I can say much else, but I think that especially the wide range of actions was just like, that's exactly what we're trying to promote.
Yeah, I think the initial comments are partly due to a misunderstanding about online tools, or that there's this dichotomy that it's online stuff and offline stuff, and we know that that's increasingly less and less true. So if you say, oh, well, collectivism is a replacement for activism, then sure, you can say those things, but it isn't. It's part of the toolkit. It's part of a whole set of tools that we can now use really well. And I think the join the vote thing shows that really nicely, because you might say it's an online tool and you just get a pack, but then you then go and walk the streets and you interact with your community. And that's what it's about. It's about increasing the ways that we can engage people, we can inform people, we can give them more information, we can coordinate better and work together better as activists.
Thank you. I feel quite bad now because I apologise. That wasn't an easy way into the discussion. But actually, you raised something there that I've got written down here. Is actually, is there even such a thing as online activism, or is it this spectrum of sort of light touch stuff to the more detailed stuff, all of which can be supported by the web? I think.
I think in general, like this is not an activism thing at all. There's a big trend in like in every industry right now of like, oh, that's like a digital thing, right? Oh, that's a tech thing, like, and we've really got to sort that out. Like, technology is embedded in our lives now. You can't say, oh, that's a digital problem. Like, it's like having a department just for all of the people who use wood in your organization. Like, oh, right, yeah, we've got new desks. Can you tell the wood department? Like, you can't do that. And so when it comes to activism, you've got to just embrace this as a medium and say, yeah, this is a way to do certain actions. And there are benefits and there are disadvantages to that.
I think I see the web as like a coordination and a communication device, and like the reason that we coordinate with each other is in order to maximize organizational output, right? So the web is a way of making that ratio from the amount of coordination it takes to the amount of action or output you can have smaller. And I think that the web is not a panacea. It's not going to fix everything. There's unequal access to the web and unequal access to the internet, but it is one way of communicating, one way of organizing that improves the way that we can engage as activists and interact with each other and work toward the same goals. And I agree with Sanjay. Actually, like I think that this division between like campaigners and the tech department or activists in the digital team is kind of becoming more and more of a fallacy, and we should start integrating those things more as everyone moves more online and our lives move more online.
Yeah, well, I think that one of the main differences and why it is still important to say that the web is a new thing is just the ease and convenience that it does allow us to do new things. I mean, so when we sell a person a carbon permit to take it out of the market. I mean, yes, we could have done that before the internet. They could have written to us a letter and we could have sent them back. But like, that's just not what would have happened. Essentially, it's the speed and the sort of swiftness of the information and the feedback that we can now give with online tools, and the rapidity that we can report news and react to news with campaigns. That is definitely worth bearing in mind as a great resource and a real useful tool from the web. So.
Thank you very much. Do we have any from the audience, James? Oh, excellent. Let's get one of those. Roving mic.
Hi.
Nice and close.
Yes. Yeah, I've got a question about sort of organising protests or marches or things like that. Sort of the older school of activism before the web came along involved lots of different things, but one of them was, turning up somewhere and doing a protest or doing a march, like the Iraq War March in 2001 or whenever it was.
Good times.
Yeah, didn't work, but so yeah, obviously the web can be used to organise that type of activism. I was just curious to know, like for example, a climate change. I haven't really seen many climate change protests or marches. I know there are lots of sort of specific ones related to fracking. There's been quite a few of those. I'm curious to know sort of what the panel think about whether there's been a decline in sort of real physical protests or marches, or whether the web is enabling us to organise more of them.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's been a decline in physical real-world protests. Just saying that. I mean, so if you look at fracking in the UK and you look at Bolcom and the ease of which, like web and Facebook events and all this sort of thing, enabled people very easily to find out where to go and what station to get off at and when the general meeting was and how to coordinate themselves and how to then set up the email lists. I think that there's lots of examples to show that actually the web has been particularly useful in coordinating protests. I think you might say there hasn't been that many banner issues in terms of climate stuff, and I think Bolcom's probably the most visible in terms of public reaction to fracking. I don't know if you guys can think of any other particular ones, but yeah. So no, I disagree. I don't think there's been a downturn. I think it's just going to enable it, and especially if you look around. I mean, there's lots more people know more about this than I do, but about the use of the web in revolution and protest around the world at the moment. I think there's a lot to be said about that.
I'm going to speak about Greenpeace very briefly, about the shard stunt that they did last year, I think. That's very interesting because that wasn't anything they talked to their supporters about. They did it, and then they did this massive online push to get in the media, talk to their supporters, bring up the salience of climate change in the national narrative. And if you look at the amount of media that got, relative to how much giant protest at Copenhagen got, it's really interesting how you can use the internet now to take like what is essentially a very small action, which is 6 women climbing the shard, and turn it into a huge media moment that was felt not only in the UK but around Europe. And so I think that I don't think actually that physical offline action has declined, but I think that the web is a way of disseminating it further perhaps than it would have got 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, especially 20 years ago, because that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, I think to build on that as well, actions like the shard crawl, when you compare it to a big march, you've kind of got to assess each action on its own merits, just like the whole kind of tech thing. Actually, you've kind of got to say, well, okay, well, let's go and do a march, and that maybe 30 years ago was kind of the only thing you might have been able to do to show democracy in a big, impactful way. But now we can democratically decide on an action together and then go out and perform the one that everyone thinks will have the most impact. And I think that's probably if there has been a decline in things like marches, I don't think it means that there is a decline in democracy in general. I think it means that maybe it means that people are considering their actions more and considering the impact of actions. Because remember, marches are very easy to ignore, just as easy to ignore as a petition. Or
Cool, thank you. Interesting, you both mentioned the Shard ice climb there. I had a thought on that earlier, which was that was a really successful online campaign. It got a lot of attention, a lot of social media stuff. But thinking back, I don't remember a massive amount of coverage of the real issue in mass media. I suppose mass media is the wrong word. Traditional media, should we say? Is there do you think there's a problem in online activism of the traditional media treating events and campaigns that happen online as less valid, or do you think that's do you think they're getting over that slowly? Or?
I think there is a problem with mass media. A little bit. It's kind of getting better. You know, half of most newspapers are just Twitter feeds now, but but I also think that it doesn't matter, because I think soon there will be more people watching stuff on the internet than there is on television. There are YouTube channels already with bigger followings than news channels in America. It's kind of coming up so much that it doesn't matter, I don't think.
I think if the action is important or well done and has something to say, then it'll be picked up by all media channels eventually. And you can certainly see all the trad media online presences just recycling everything endlessly anyway and doing stories about people's tweets. That's all fine, but if there is an important point to be made, like, it will be picked up if there's enough strength behind it. And so I don't think that I don't think there's the case that there's a sort of hierarchy, you know, between just online stuff and then traditional print media. I think that it's increasingly just a new era, perhaps, of media.
I think also that the mass media tends to pick up, or the print media, traditional media tends to pick up stories that have a human face. So for 38 Degrees anyway, a petition with 200,000 people on it will not necessarily make the news, but if an individual member has a very interesting story to tell, or hands that petition in a really interesting way, or says something that is kind of a human face to that campaign, that will make the media. So that's something I think that online organizations or digital organizations across the country need to think about. It's not just about demonstrating power and strength, because those numbers are meaningless unless you actually have the human interest and the human face attached to them, and that's often how you can get into the traditional media.
Can I ask, just before we move on, what the have you guys looked at the correlation between media coverage and successful campaigns that you run?
I mean, we don't have any kind of scientific studies, but we have kind of hunches. So we often have adverts running in national papers that will target politicians, depending on you know, whether or not we think that'll be effective. So for example, if there's a big hand-in moment for a petition or a campaign, our members will fund full-page adverts in papers that we think MPs read, for example, and then they'll be all over the House of Commons, and you won't be able to walk into a room in the House of Commons without seeing a massive full-page ad in the Telegraph or the Times or whatever saying "Vote for this today." It's quite hard to know what works sometimes, like especially if you're throwing lots of things at an issue. It's quite hard to tell what exactly that you did created the change you wanted to see. So it's definitely an ongoing project for us to figure out how we dovetail with the traditional media. Does that make sense?
Thank you. There's a couple of questions on this before we move on to a different thing. Did you want to ask, or do you want to move on? I think Milverton had a question over there, just on this subject.
Yes, I'm very glad about the emphasis on online activism, which implies the web. Because there's one thing that people need to realize and to embrace, that the web belongs to all of us. Nobody owns it. Everybody can use it, and anybody can change it, which is very critical. Now, so when we talk about online activism, basically what we're talking about is the mobile web, because the fact remains that fewer and fewer people are actually consuming information on a desktop machine, sitting at home, than on a mobile phone. So a lot of the activist side, I have to tell you that I look at, the transition is terrible between what you can get on a website and the presentation and the look and the feel and just the delivery of information on the mobile screen. So I'm just wondering how you guys are dealing with that issue.
So we're, I'm going to really try and not get too technical because otherwise I'll bore most people, I think. But we're building our app completely responsive so that it works on all devices, and we try and test it on a really wide range of devices, everything we put into it. We also hold accessibility as the absolute most important thing of what we do. Like, we're basically visualizing complex problems and making them simple to understand. So if you can't get a good understanding of a complex problem on whatever device you're viewing on, whether that's a screen reader if you're blind, or whether that's a mobile device, or whatever you're viewing it on, then we've kind of failed. So that's absolutely kind of one of the most important things that we're trying to do.
Yep, you got me. Sanbag, our website was built 5 years ago. It is not responsive. I will make it responsive in the future at some point. So the scoring MEP tool we did is responsive. So we got that, but that was built very recently, and I think it's true that we're changing so quickly that everyone just has to be really on point to make sure that they are keeping up with it and changing as hardware changes. So yeah, that's key. But you're absolutely right to point it out that yeah, the mobile web is dominant.
I feel like we should have some kind of supportive hug now. James, who have we got next?
We've got a couple more questions. One from Paul.
Nice and close to your
Yeah,
mouth
sorry,
so people can hear.
it was about half an hour ago. My question was, how valuable in relative terms is any advocacy which is not backed up by data?
Yeah, sure. So we do an awful lot of advocacy in report writing, and it's true that a lot of the core of our reports are based up on data that we take from the European Commission. However, a lot of the advocacy we can do because we've earned a position of trust within the NGO community and the policymakers because of doing reports based on data. So I think when you get to a certain level of credibility, it's your opinion just matters of itself because of who you are. And I think that's the same of big NGOs, campaigning organizations who've been around for a long time, who've said, checked and verifiable things over a long period of time. They can then just say, we think this, and they have to explain themselves a little less than they would otherwise. So, but of course, if you're new or your voice is new or the issue is new, then I think it's very important that you actually have some verifiable information to base whatever you're saying on.
Yeah, I think for us anyway, it's very important for the data degrees to work with partner organizations and to work with organizations whose skills and expertise in certain policy areas we lack. And as generalist campaigners who work across a whole range of subjects, we very much rely on the rest of the sector for that policy detail. And we talk about what we bring to the party, and what we bring to the party is numbers of people and kind of impact at certain moments. What we don't bring to the party is 5 years worth of policy research. That's just not what we do, and I feel like the sector could have better read across in terms of what everyone's skills are and what value they add to certain campaigns at certain times. Because not everyone has to be a policy expert, not everybody has to have 2.5 million members. I think that we can dovetail together.
It's a really interesting question. Firstly, I think, correct me if you're wrong, but are you using data to mean the source of what you're saying, like as in like backing up what you're saying?
Yeah, it does depend on the issue, but
Okay.
if you, for instance, we were talking earlier on about the fracking.
Yeah.
Trying to make sense of the fracking debate.
Yeah.
To see both sides of the equation. So with that, because what you're really looking at is how much carbon is being released in the atmosphere.
Yep.
data could support points of view,
Absolutely.
either for and against. And in my opinion, which is behind my question, it will be really good to actually expose that rather than just shout. I can shout louder than you about that fracking is bad or good, and therefore I win.
Yeah.
As opposed to this much carbon versus that much carbon with different scenarios. So that was really my question.
So, in terms of how important is sourcing some kind of stats that back up what you say, I think it's absolutely important, but you can't automatically push up someone's viewpoint. Like 99% of statistics are made up on the spot. 87. All right. And so you can't just like take people's numbers at face value. What we're doing is allowing people to vote up comments, and so you can go check and see if you think, as a community, whether or not someone has sourced something that is a credible source. The other point to make on this, which I think is kind of equally interesting, is that, and why I asked my question, is that when I think of the word data, I don't necessarily just think of a source backing up an argument. I usually kind of think of the definition of data as being information without context, and that means that you can then apply your own context to this data and find new information about it. And that's why I think data is really powerful, and I don't know how that relates to your question other than tangentially, but I think it's really important to kind of keep in mind when you're kind of talking about data and its relevancy in activism.
So just to say a little bit more, not to be too dominant. So I think the trouble with having lots of data and evidence is that it can cross a huge amount of different spheres. So you can talk about CO2 emissions, but you can also talk about cost. You can come up with a huge array of wealth of data to back up basically whatever your point is. And we find that when we try and engage businesses to talk about carbon targets, and they say, but the costs will drive up and there'll be carbon leakage and all sorts of other issues. So obviously data should be front and center, but sometimes it isn't necessarily the most useful starting point to start the conversation. I think that's why you see a lot of campaigning organizations now doing values-based campaigning to say, what do we value in the world? Let's use that as a basis for our policy choice and then work out what the details should be, rather than saying, well, what's the singular data? Because then you get stuck in these arguments and you can be taken by surprise by someone else's amount of statistics that they can just bury you with.
Okay. James, what's next?
Another question from Woon.
It's Woon.
Hey. Hello. Hi. I'm just wondering how effective is sort of campaigning for local.
Louder.
Hello. My question is, how effective is campaigning on local issues, sort of relating to, or able to relate to a global sort of challenge, like a resource sort of, energy challenge?
Who wants that first? How effective is campaigning when it comes to global challenges and things?
How would a local sort of issue?
How do you translate that local to global sort of
how does
campaigning?
it sort of tie in?
I think that it's tempting as individuals to think that as one person you don't have that much agency over a global problem. I think that's one of the issues with climate change campaigning, is sometimes, I personally, even though I'm a campaigner by trade, sometimes feel that no matter what I do, I'm never going to have the impact that I want to have, therefore why bother? I think that local campaigning is one way to get around that. I think that you can take local issues that relate to national issues or to international issues and use them as a prism through which to view a problem, and also use them as a prism through which to employ and feel your own agency over cause X or Y. And I think the local campaigning can be really, really powerful in terms of winning hearts and minds, in terms of persuading individuals, because ultimately For me, anyway, people power is very important, and to win arguments, you need a lot of people. And to get lots of people, you have to persuade them individually, and sometimes the thing that matters to them most will be their local issue, not this kind of remote international issue that they're never going to feel any power over. So sometimes local can be the way that you get people's interest and engagement on board.
Yeah, I think local engagement is really key, and this is why the web is really awesome. So on my Facebook feed, I get updates about people fighting coal mines in Australia, or like people delocking themselves to mining apparatus in Canada, and a lot of my friends in America who have just been chained themselves up to the White House to protest the KXL pipeline. And I can see all of those, and I feel a little bit part of them as well, but I don't think then, I should go to Australia. I think I can do something locally and share it with everybody else and be part of a global movement. And that's very empowering and very important.
The flip side of that is that if you want to get involved in a global issue, get involved in a global organisation, because you're definitely not going to change it on your own. Like the globe's a big place. So there's a lot of organisations that are set up to deal with global issues. Like we're working with Amnesty International, and even Amnesty International, who are massive, like I get scared every time I walk into their office, they're so big, but they work with the UN all of the time, because the UN's even bigger than them and have even more clout in big governments all around the world. So I think it's working out the scale of the problem and then working out what organisation is dealing with that scale. So like if you've got a problem with your girlfriend, don't go to Amnesty International, they won't be able to help you. But if you've got a problem with torture around the world, then go talk to Amnesty or the government of a specific organisation, country even.
Thank you. James?
Hi, sort of related question. So the whole topic of avoiding greater than 2-degree climate change probably requires radical change rather than incremental change. Avoiding the whole overthrowing the government thing.
Why?
How can activism enable radical change without making people feel okay with token gestures?
Who's first? You're all nodding.
It's it's a very hard question, but it is kind of something we're looking at a lot. And you kind of, on one level, I almost want to ask you to define radical change, but I also don't want to be that pedantic. If we take it as big changes, I feel like you have to say radical changes are always made up of lots of small changes. And so if you want to, so you're asking how can the internet enable big changes? I think it's breaking them down into small changes and making sure everybody understands what those little changes mean and how those each individual little changes affect you. Because if I say your whole world's going to change, that does sound scary. But if I say this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing are all going to change, don't worry about those things, because that actually doesn't matter to you, doesn't affect you at all. But these things are going to directly impact you, and behind all of that, there's a lot of data, and behind you, there's a lot of data. So it's really easy to work out what things are going to change you in a big change, and I think that's one of the big ways that the web can help big radical changes. Yeah, sure. Okay. I still think those can be broken down into smaller things. Yeah, like an electric car, it comes down to a small thing, and even lots of small things actually, like the price of your next car, or like how it's going to drive, what it's actually going to mean to you.
Yeah, I think things like decarbonising the nation can happen with lots of small things that then gain momentum, and then it's clear that there is a huge consumer demand for it and companies deciding that that's a good thing to do. But to sort of perhaps address a little bit more your idea of like a big, massive change, that can happen through a new idea. A new idea is what infects everybody and makes everyone think, oh, we were doing this wrong. And I think a great example of that is the divestment movement at the moment. And suddenly, campaigners have shown really, really well that all this money in pension funds and investment funds and university endowments is tied up with fossil fuel companies. And I mean, there has been other campaigns about the arms trade and similar before, but I don't think it's got the same level of traction. And hard to say why that is, but they've certainly done a really good job in making a change in everybody's mind that that's no longer acceptable, that putting your money in these institutions is not on anymore, and therefore we will change it, and we will ask our banks and our pension funds to change their investments, and that potentially has an enormous impact, trillions of dollars, that might be diverted away from those sectors. So that, I would say, is radical change, empowered by the ability to communicate ideas, and the web has got to play a great part in that.
I think in order to have radical change, I mean, either you have the small group of armed citizens approach, or I think you have the slow incremental approach where society comes around to a radical shift. But if you have a radical shift in mind, like, for example, that we all drive on the right, or that we all have electric cars, or that we all turn off our lights at 9 p.m., right? Majority of the country is not going to wake up tomorrow and come around to that viewpoint, having not held the beginnings of it today. And I think that what online activism and online methods of communication can help with is moving people slowly towards a more radical viewpoint. And everyone starts at different levels, right? But I think you need to bring everyone up to a certain level of acceptance of that this radical change, whatever it is plausible. So lots of radical changes are implausible to lots and lots of people. And what you need to do is move the debate and the narrative to the point where radical change is not kind of over the horizon, but it's kind of, you can see it. And I think that's what online communication can really, really help with, and online activism can really do very well. And that doesn't mean that you're going to go out tomorrow saying we should all turn our lights off at 9 p.m., but it might mean that you start talking about electricity usage and how that impacts the climate, et cetera, et cetera.
I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I'll say anyway. It's so funny that you said drive on the right, because obviously the first early adopters of that are going to be the first ones to die. So lining up the incentives is really important. And it's really important if you're a green campaigner to say, this is why it's better. It's not a case that you have to ditch your MacBook. I was hearing someone earlier talking about putting their MacBook off the grid and charging it up by solar power. There are ways that you can show that this is a desirable and a better future for everyone, and that you're having fun doing it, and then maybe suddenly everyone will switch over.
Okay, we've got one or two more from James, maybe?
Probably about 2 questions. Candy's got a question?
Hi there. Yeah, it was about the future of online activism, and in a day and age where I guess we get a lot of emails and there's a lot of information, how do you maintain interest and keep that audience in touch with really important messages?
Well, I think that's a massive danger. You're right. I know my inbox is hugely overfull with unread emails. And I think that as everyone moves online and more information comes out online, I mean, I just miss things. I miss entire news events in the world because my Facebook feed is full of cats. And that's definitely a danger. But I think that one of the ways you can do it is to make it relevant to individuals. So you're not just talking, you're not kind of standing in your soapbox yelling that climate change is a terrible thing and how we're all going to die, but not kind of talking about, what it means to that individual person. And I think people, for better or for worse, are quite self-interested, and I include myself in that. And so I think that one of the ways that campaigning reaches out to individuals who may or may not care about the macro level is to talk about the micro level. And if you maintain your communications and campaign communications slightly tangentially related to the individual's life and interests, then I think that's one way of keeping people engaged. But also it's hard, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, generating content that keeps people engaged seems to be the online question at the moment. And if to compete with BuzzFeed, for people's attention, then that's obviously going to be difficult. But I think the way to do it is just to put an amount of care and attention and detail into your communications, to do err on the side of doing less, but then make sure you really make it worthwhile to if people give you their attention, they really feel like they've got something out of it, and it's speaking to something they care about, it's tailored to them. So Phil at the back writes our newsletters and spends a lot of time trying to craft them and make them appealing to people who've bought our carbon credits. So it's definitely very important.
it's kind of a hard question for me to ask without selling what we're building too much, because we kind of think that we're making something that's going to push forward the future of online activism, and we kind of believe that because of what you guys have said. We think that the best way of doing that is to tailor every step around what you care about. So we have a page where you can enter into our thing at any step. So if you do care about a healthier environment, then you should be on that page. But if you're already on another level that's way down the chain, then you should be there. But the way that I think that people can apply that more generally to their communications and their campaigning is just really trying to tailor things as much as possible, and using the web and using data as much as possible to work out what people like. Like Google are doing it, so charities should be bloody doing it. Yeah.
Thank you. One more from the audience, and then we'll have a couple to finish up.
We've got a couple. One from Bruno. And Sean had a question? Yeah. Sean?
We'll come back to you, Bruno. Honest.
It's just on that point exactly, actually, to do with tailoring messaging. Not so much tailoring the messaging to activists to resonate with them specifically, but more how activists can tailor their messages to the people they're trying to influence, and whether some of these digital tools can actually enhance the conversation and by that the sort of democratic accountability, I suppose, for want of a less jargony phrase. But do you know what I mean? To try and develop that conversation rather than MPs feeling like they're just being spammed with exactly the same message, that they're having something that means that it's specific to their constituency or whatever. They therefore respond with a slightly more sophisticated, or they have to think harder about their own position. Do you see that as something that's evolving? Because there was once something came out with the Parliament hack that was like a sentiment analysis tool that sort of just crawls through an MP's inbox and goes, 70% of your constituents feel this way about this issue. So you'd actually have to read the emails.
We tried out a few things when we were working out what we were going to build, and one of the ideas we had originally was a tool that scans the page you're reading, and it was a little Chrome extension. It will pop up with what MPs care most about what you're reading. So if you're reading something about fox hunting, it will tell you, oh hey, this MP voted this way. And we got really excited about it, and we told loads of people, and everyone was like, oh wow, so you can email MPs something that they actually care about and they'll pay attention to you. And then we realized a massive problem was that the data that's being published right now is about 4 years old. And it just suddenly made us realize, oh right, okay, so loads of these MPs aren't even in government anymore, and our data was completely out of date. So I think before that stuff gets really good, there's a lot of work that needs to be done within Parliament in opening up data, and it's being done right now. It's being improved, but unfortunately for us, it wasn't being done fast enough for us to be able to build a business on it.
I think there's something about just making our MPs more bloody accountable, but separate to that, there's something about messaging as well. So when we write to our members about what I call the hospital closure clause earlier, we will say the hospital closures clause because that makes sense to people. If you say clause 119 of the care bill, it's like, I don't care, right? But if it's hospital closure clause, you're like, oh, it's my hospital, it's closing. What, there's a clause about it? Like, then you get involved. But then when we get them to write to their MPs, it doesn't say hospital closure clause in the email to MPs, it says clause 119 of the care bill, because MPs call it clause 119 of the care bill. So I think it's important to remember telling messages to your audience, and sometimes we get that wrong, sometimes also the people get that wrong, and I think that the better we do that, and the more effective we are at that, the more we'll get our message out to the audiences we're trying to actually reach, as opposed to just sending out one thing to loads of people and assuming that it will land exactly the same with everybody.
Yeah, I think to speak to Sanjay's point, I think there are lots of useful tools and better ways that we can display things, But yeah, so much groundwork needs to be done in terms of coordination and opening up data, and the more civil society is able to express what it means by that and ask governments and organizations to properly enable developers and other campaigning groups to use their data properly by giving it out in proper formats and so forth, it'll just be even more powerful, essentially. But no, it's a great question.
Okay, well, I have one more quick one from Bruno.
One more
quick
question from
responses,
Bruno.
and then we'll have to wrap up.
Well, we're talking about asking people what they care about, but I answered, I think it was last week, the survey by 38 Degrees about what we were interested in, and I ended up thinking, but I care about all of this. So my answer to your survey was probably completely useless to you to be able to prioritize, because I answered, yes, I'm interested in all of that. So how do you deal with that?
So you're a keen member, that's great. So we publish to give a bit of context, we survey 50,000 random people every week about what campaigns they'd like us to prioritize that week or in general. We tend to get the same one at the top every single time, which is NHS privatization, anti-it, not pro-it. But actually, there does tend to be a gradient in the answers. It does mean that for individuals like me who I'd like to campaign very much about all these things, it does mean that your issues get prioritized into X and Y that actually has moments coming up that month or whenever. Like we have climate change coming relatively high every single week, but there's not always an action or a moment on climate change that's actually going to make a difference. And the job of the staff team is to try and figure out at what point our members should come in on what issue, and to use the survey results to kind of direct that. So I'm sorry that we haven't done everything you wanted to do. We will try.
You wanted a button that said, I want to rate everything really finely, and I want it to be tuned exactly what I wanted. Maybe.
But even that might have been like 100% on every level for you, right? You might have gone, oh, okay, well, that's an injustice. I definitely care about that. Like, I probably would have, and like, I definitely don't engage with every issue in the world, but I think that, bad shit is bad. Like, and so if you ask me like which one of these bad shit do you care about stopping, then I'm gonna say all of them, of course. I would just say that surveys, like in general, I just really don't like surveys. Like, and just to anybody who is trying to collect data, please don't send out a survey to your mailing list. Like, just like, or no, not just. This is very unfortunate because you've obviously put out a survey, but I don't want to call you out for that at all. Like like every organisation does it almost. But I'll tell you who I've never received a survey from is Google, and they have so much data on me. They have so much data on all of you. They don't need to ask, right? And if you're a campaigning organisation, if you're doing something for good, work out better ways of getting data from people. Like, if you're convinced about that, don't just... I think the big problem with surveys, for me, is that there's no immediate feedback. Whereas everything that collects data from you in a really clever way will give you something in return straight away. Like, Google knows what you care about because you've told it millions of times probably what you care about, and then it's told you all of the stuff on the web that is to do with that thing. Like, that's why Google have loads of data on you, because they give you immediate feedback when they ask you a question. And that's what surveys don't do, and that's why I kind of really, really get switched off by surveys. And just, other kind of data entry that just feels more like I'm giving you something rather than this is a nice exchange, or even it doesn't feel like an exchange. It feels like you're giving me something, and by the way, you're sneakily taking something off me and selling it to the NSA, but that's a separate topic.
Excellent. I just want to ask, I suppose, two important questions to finish. We really only have 5 minutes left, but this has been really, really good. I hope everybody's enjoyed it. I'm going to have to rush through my things at the end. But I want to get in one question that I think is very important for online activism, but also very important for Cleanweb in general, which is that the audience is self-selecting for what we do. Everyone's online, right? So that discounts a whole bunch of people, not only the digital divide within the country, but globally. How do we improve the diversity of participation in this kind of thing, both for activism and for the using the web for good that we're all trying to do?
Firstly, accessibility. That's number one point. I think there's a stair when you get in there. I'm not sure if the other entrance is accessible, but like that's a big deal. Like, you know, if your website, going back to the mobile web point, if your website can't be read on a mobile phone or it can't be read by a screen reader, you've just discounted a massive percentage of the population. Yeah, that's my point.
Right, it can be read. You just have to zoom in, and that is fine. That is fine. To defend our lovely website, that is fine because people understand how websites can be zoomed in on. It still behaves in the same way. So, yeah, but your point was correct. In general, accessibility is super important. Access to services. I feel like it's not the younger generations who don't have access to technology or don't understand them. So we're talking about some different groups. I think government has a lot of work to do to make sure all the services and access to all these new tools are available to everybody. And yeah, that is definitely really important. Should be highly prioritized, and I think is being so to some extent.
I think all of that's completely true, but I think that you can't ignore the fact that there's a massive generational gap going on, and there's lots of people in the UK who care a lot about politics, the world we live in, activism, who just are not going to go online in the way that perhaps we will. And I hope that activism continues to tailor itself both to the online young techie crowd, to the middle-aged crowd who have Gmail but have never heard of Instagram, and to older crowds who have never heard of any of the above. Right? I think that it's important that we're aiming at all the levels, and for that I hope that offline is prioritized as much as online is, and I hope that we keep libraries open as well as all moving on to Kindles and using Amazon. I think that all those things are important, and maybe that will change in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years time, but I think for now we shouldn't be cutting huge populations of the country out of activism and of our kind of activism just because they don't have iPhones or smartphones. My apologies, techies.
Yeah, just to go back to that, I touched on a little bit earlier. I mean, it's just that this online-offline thing I don't think is a very helpful thing to say, and that it shouldn't be a replacement. And I think that is kind of difficult, especially in London, that everything is on Meetup and so forth. And then things should also be actually like written up somewhere in a real physical space so that people can see them or talked about. And I think we probably don't do enough of that, in fact.
Yeah, I'd actually say that whole online-offline thing is actually an accessibility divide. I feel really silly for calling up such easy examples as wheelchair steps and screen readers now, because actually online-offline is the biggest accessibility divide. Like, there are loads of people who don't know how to use computers. My housemate is one of them, and that's another story. But that's a whole kind of accessibility isn't about disabled people or people with. It's about including everybody. Inclusivity is probably a better word to use, actually.
Excellent, thank you. But I think we're pretty much out of time. We need to be out of here at 9, but I'm kind of running up against that, sorry. Would you like to just sort of end with one sentence that you'd like to leave the audience with? That's quite evil. You can say no. Right, that didn't work. Okay. Okay, Laurence will do.
Yeah, it's not all about the web. Get out on the streets and shout very loudly.
That's a very good way to end. Thank you very much to our panel. I think this has been really great. Thank you to Susie, to Laurence, and to Sanjay. Give them a big hand.